guys, today we're going to do another pattern video. The last video, the first pattern video that we did, was for a quarter fold pattern, which makes pads that are symmetrical both front and sideways, top to bottom and sideways. Today's video is going to be about how you can make a pattern for sewing pads made off of an asymmetrical disposable pad, which is the first example that I'm going to give you. And then I'm going to show you how to draw pads for asymmetrical and curvier shapes that are not easily accommodated by the simple quarter fold pattern. These are called half fold patterns because they're symmetrical from side to side, but they're not symmetrical from top to bottom. So let's get into the first one, which is an old overnight disposable of the brand that I used to use. And you can apply what I'm doing in these videos to any shape or size disposable that you have that you want to try and copy. I've never made a pad this shape, so this pattern that I made for you for this video from my disposable, I'm really kind of excited to see how it turns out when I try to sew one, because I've never made a pad this shape. So this is going to be a new experience for me too, but I'm going to show you the whole process, how I make a pattern from it, and then once I figure out how to get my sewing videos on board, I will show you the pad that I sew with this pattern as well, and hopefully manage to capture the filming process for that too. Okay, let's get into it. Okay, so you're going to need to start with 2 pieces of paper. You can use any kind of paper, but I prefer to use this postal craft paper. You're going to need a disposable pad, and you're going to need a ruler. I use a little slide ruler for sewing, and a pen or 2, you'll see why I have 2, and a pair of scissors to cut. Now you're going to take your 2 pieces of paper and you're going to fold them in half. Make sure that that folded crease is on your right. And what you're going to do, this is an overnight disposable that I used before I switched to cloth, and you'll notice that the back is much longer than the front, which is why we need to use this process. We can't use a quarter fold like from my previous video because it's not symmetrical from top to bottom, only from side to side. So what you do here is you just stick the pad kind of trying to line up the center on your paper. You want the fold to be going right through the center of your shape there. And a special note about disposable wings, they're different than cloth pad wings because with cloth pads, we need them to wrap all the way around the underwear and overlap so that we can attach a closure like a snap or a button. So when we make a pattern for these, we have to do different things with the wings, and you'll see that. So once you get your pad all laid out, you're going to take your pen and just trace around the edge of it. And this does not need to be perfect. Do not pressure yourself here, because we're going to correct any imperfections in the tracing when we do our seam allowance line, which you'll see here in a second. So just draw around the shape, no matter how wonky or irregular it is, just draw around it. Okay, now when you get to the bottom of this, we have to add a seam allowance. We can't just cut this out. You can watch my previous video to get the basic idea of what we're doing here, because this one is a little bit, as you can see, I was having trouble getting it to unstick from the paper. But this shape is going to be a little different, and I've never made a pad this shape, so this was kind of go as you go for me too. I mean, so I'm doing this in this video exactly the way it's going to be for you. This was the first time I'd done one like this. And then I just measured how long it was. What's interesting is that this ended up being just slightly over 12 inches for that pad, which is kind of funny because that's the length that I arrived at with cloth that I like for myself. Which I thought was funny. I really did like the length and shape of these particular disposable pads, so I'm kind of excited to see how these overnights turn out. Okay, so now we're going to do a 1/4 inch dashed line, and it's a little off camera there, but you'll see when I come down what I'm doing here. You just make a dashed dotted line around the external shape. Now you see these little wonky bumps that were in the plastic design. You don't need to copy that. Just we're going to make a clean shape. The end result is going to be the same shape and fit. Now with the wings we're going to skip for right now because like I said, we're going to have to modify those wings so that they work for a cloth pattern design, and it's super easy. But for now, when you're doing your initial seam allowance dashed line, you just ignore that wing for a moment and then just go finish going around. This doesn't need to be perfect. You're going to notice down here I made a mistake, and it's still going to turn out great. I actually didn't position the pad far enough away from the edge of my paper to make a 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way down at the bottom. That's no big deal. It just means that our finished product is not going to be exactly the same shape, but it's going to be pretty darn close, and it's going to work functionally just as well. So This is just an example. Not everything is always perfect. Perfection is not the goal. Functionality and having it look pretty is the goal. All right. Now, with wings, we need them to be at least 6 inches long in order for this to work. But for an overnight like this, which is thicker in the middle than your average day pad is going to be, you're going to want your wings to be 7 inches long. And that can vary from person to person, but I encourage you to start as a first pad like this, go with a 7-inch wingspan, because then you know for sure it's going to overlap. So I'm measuring out 3.5 inches on my little slide rule here, and then I'm going to mark with my blue pen where I want the finished 7-inch mark to go, because you see I have this little, the edge of the pad was insufficient. So I'm going to mark a little line so that I can gauge where my seam allowance should be. So this blue mark is at 3.5 inches, and that tells me how long I want my finished wings to be at the end there. And then I'm going to take my red marker and go out another 1/4 inch, see? I'm going to mark my seam allowance here. If that didn't make sense, watch it again or ask me questions in comments and I will do my very best to clarify for you. So now what you've got is where you're going to want to cut. You want to make this straight. Don't try to make this all rounded and wonky, especially if this is your first time making a pad like this. Just make it as simple a shape as possible for yourself. You can round this. If you want to get creative with the shape of it, you go. But for me, I want it to be nice and simple. So this is the shape that I've ended up with here. And then you're just going to cut your shape on the red dotted line. And then you get to watch me do that, which is going to be fascinating. Oh, I forgot this bit. This is voiceover, by the way. Because I'm looking at how wide this wing is, and I've never made a pad this wide, you're going to want more than one snap in the middle. Okay, you're going to need, for a wing this big, this long, you're going to need more than one snap. So what I did was I marked the center of the wing there, and then I'm just going to mostly eyeball. I'm going to draw a little X where I think the snaps are going to end up going. That's just going to help me at the end, after I've sewn this pad together, it's going to help me determine where I want to place my snaps, because you're going to need to on this. Okay, then you just cut it out. I know it's fascinating to watch me cut paper. I have not yet figured out how to speed up videos so that you don't have to sit through the tedious part. So I just try to think of useful things to tell you while I'm doing boring things like this. Yeah, and remember, you're going to do this with 2 pieces of paper, because we're going to make the absorbent core off of our copy. And I'll go through that whole process one more time with you on this. I'm actually really excited to sew this pad now that I've made this pattern, because I've never done one in this shape or anything that even really resembles this shape. So it's kind of cool. All right, so now once you've cut out on your red dotted line, you see that you get your big overnight menstrual pad shape. And it has wings that are going to wrap around your underwear sufficiently to overlap and get a nice snug closure so that it works. And this one is an overnight, so it's going to be more in the back. Okay, so now we're ready to make the absorbent core pattern, and we're going to do this using the 1/2 inch rule like we did in my previous video. So you fold your copy in half, and then the first thing we're going to do is get rid of that wing. So you take your pen, and in as straight and clean a line as possible, you just get rid of the wing shape altogether, so that the only part of the pattern you're using is the part that doesn't have wing attached to it. And you're just going to take a ruler. I use my little slide rule, but you can use any kind of ruler, and mark a red dashed line 1/2 inch away from the edge all the way around your shape. When you get to the red line, measure your 1/2 inch from the red line. You'll see what I'm doing there. And we just pretend that the wing isn't there and that our red line is the edge when we're going through this section. My goodness, I look like Mrs. Claus in a fluffy pink sweater all leaned up against my ironing board. Mercy. How unflattering is that? But you didn't come to look at me in my sweater, you came to look at the pad pattern. Okay, now when you get to the end of this, you're just going to cut this shape out, and you'll see it's just almost invariably perfect. The 1/2 inch rule when you're making a pad pattern like this. When you cut these out, they sew up beautifully. You always have enough room on your sewing machine to grab enough fabric to get everything put together, and it just works really well. Basically what you're doing with the 1/2 inch rule, and I hesitate to say this because I don't want anybody to get confused, but you're basically just adding another 1/4 inch seam allowance for the absorbent core. But yeah, just think of it as a 1/4 inch seam allowance for the outside, and you want to do the 1/2 inch rule to draw your pattern for the absorbent core, and see, it fits great. It's going to be perfect. I'm actually looking forward to this. Okay, this is the second time I'm trying to record this because my computer froze up on me in the middle and deleted half of my voiceover. I'm so irritated. All right, in this section, I'm going to be demonstrating several different shapes that you can draw for yourself if you want to just hand make a shape of your own without trying to copy from a predetermined, disposable or whatnot. The 3 things that you need to measure for any shape that you're going to draw is you need to figure out how long you want the pad to be. So if you want a 10-inch pad, you're going to mark at 10 inches. If you want an 8-inch pad, mark at 8 inches, etc. The second measurement you want to know how wide you want the pad to be. If you want the pad to be a 2.5 inch finished pad all the way up and down, then make marks to note that. If you want it to be wider or what have you, mark 1/2 of the space, because when you unfold it, it's going to double. And you'll see I made a mistake and forgot to do that part later, and I'll have to change it here in the video. And then the third thing you want to mark is where your wing should terminate. So I'm gonna recommend that you do 3 or 3.5 inches for that, so that when you open the pad, you have a 6 to 7 inch wingspan. Because you really want them to be that long so that they will overlap. What you hear in the background with Cadence whining is I was eating an apple earlier and she wants one and I don't have any more, and so that's what she's crying about. Anyway, here where I was marking my sides before I started my shape, you can see up at the top I have my length marked, and then that was supposed to be the width of the pad, and then that dot there is where the wings terminate at 3.5 inches. However, I forgot to make it half, and so my measurements there were wrong, and I have to go back and measure 1.25 inches to get my 2.5 inch finished width. Okay, so while I'm doing that, I'm going to show you a rounded shape that's very similar to the one that I began sewing my own pads with. And then I'm going to show you a more rectangular shape that you could try, and then I'm going to kind of show you how you would add flair to a shape. So like, for example, if you like it to be skinny in the middle and then kind of do an hourglass on the top and bottom, that gradual widening is what we call flair on a pad. And I'll show you how to do all 3 of those kinds of shapes on this kind of paper. This first one, you may even recognize the shape, is the pads that I used to make before I started making a more traditional flared design. Now, when you're doing these asymmetrical, because you want more in the front or more in the back, I find it most useful to have the longest part of the wing, where the wing ends there. That mark, that line where you measure your 3.5, should be 1/3 of the way up the total length of your pad. That just tends to be a really good place for it, I found. Now here I'm just showing you how you just basically freehand a rectangular shape on these same measurements. These marks that you've made give you a great deal of freedom as to what shape you would do. I haven't changed my measured marks. I'm just changing the way in which I connect the dots. So if I were to cut on that red line, that would be a rectangular pad that had more inches in the front than in the back, or you could flip it and do it back then front. And then here with this green pen, I'm going to show you how I would attempt to draw a flared shape that's more of an hourglass shape pad. And then I would just use the same wing there that I've used for the red, and then come down and flare it out on the other end. And so that's what that would look like. Now on any of these 3 shapes, you would hand draw this shape, then add your 1/4 inch seam allowance. And then when you cut that out, you'll have your 2 pieces, and then you use your 1/2 inch rule. You get rid of the wing, and then make a dotted line 1/2 inch away from the edge of the pattern to make your absorbent core. And no matter what your shape is, the core that you make with a 1/2 inch rule should fit perfectly in the center for assembly into a completed cloth pad. Now I'm cutting this one out just so that you can see, it's always kind of rewarding to see the shape that you've drawn. And there you go. And so that's the general shape that you would get from cutting a rounded shape like that. I really hope that was helpful. Those are just a couple of the shapes you can do. There's really no end to what you could try. Okay, I hope that was helpful. That's how you do a basic half fold, and it's for any pad that's the same from this side to this side, and that's going to be pretty much every pad. I've never seen one where the left wing was different than the right wing, unless it was a novelty pad that somebody did for, you know, a holiday or to be funny. But if they're different on the top end than they are on the bottom end, then you can always use the half fold. And don't shy away from trying to freehand your shapes. I mean, worst case scenario, you cut it out, you don't like it, get another piece of paper and try again until you get the shape that you want. And that's the easiest way to customize. Also, for a lot of the disposables that are not symmetrical on both sides, I hope that was helpful too, because you can copy any disposable using that method. Now, if you have a wingless disposable, all you have to do is trace your pad and then, you know, make a line from the edge of it, making sure that you come out to the 3.5 inch mark so that you have a 7-inch wingspan. And then just draw a triangle or draw a half moon if you like rounded wings, or, you know, draw a tab shape or whatever you'd like. And then it'll be the same on both sides that way. So anyway, I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, if there was something that I didn't cover pattern related in these two videos, let me know and I will do my best to accommodate. And then I think I'm ready to start trying to show you process for sewing videos to show you how to put some pads together. And hopefully that will be forthcoming very soon. At any rate, whether that happens or not, I will see you soon because I have lots of other things to talk to you about. So I will see you soon, and thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and check out the Facebook group. Thanks very much. Bye.